All right. Well, we want to welcome everybody to this training session, supporting students transition to employment. Want to start off first with just a quick little housekeeping thing, if I can get my keyboard to work. There we go. So we do have closed captioning that should be available. In the bottom of your Zoom call, there should be a little three dots that say more. Click on that, select captions, and then as the image on the right will show, there will be an option now that says show captions, and that will enable the AI captioning service from Zoom to be available for you. We do want to ask that everybody signs in to today's session. Go ahead and click on that QR code that is on the screen, or not click on it, sorry, but scan it. And I did not write that link down, unfortunately, for the sign-in, but you can also type in that tiny URL link as well to sign in. There will be a survey and a couple other things that will happen at the end of today's call. So I'll leave that up for a couple more seconds for folks to get signed in, please. All right. Perfect. Thank you, Angie. And once you start screen share, there's only so many things you can do with the computer at that point. So, all right. Awesome. So my name is Kirby Ryder. I work for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. We are one of the state of Idaho agencies. I am based in Idaho Falls, and my role with Voc Rehab is to work with employers in our community to understand their workforce needs, what careers they offer, what skills they're looking for, and then more importantly, how do we connect students and job seekers to these opportunities? Another key part of my role is helping businesses connect with students, especially our students who are preparing to transition into the workforce. And we do a lot of that through work-based learning. So things like internship, job shadows, and other experiences that give our students hands-on exposure to careers. So I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to talk more about how this works later in today's presentation. My background prior to joining Voc Rehab is I actually spent about a decade in human resources, leading teams of recruiters and other HR professionals. I've been involved in every aspect of the HR process, but one of my favorites and my passion is actually in training, specifically on how do we create more engaging onboarding experiences that help employees stay and be successful in their careers. So it's really exciting that we get to kind of merge those two worlds by what do we do with work-based learning, what do we do with employment, and kind of help bridge those two together. So I'd like to hand things over to Angie from the Idaho Competitive Integrated Employment Center to introduce herself and the IC Center.
Yeah, thanks, Kirby. So yes, I am Angie Murillo, and I work for the Idaho Competitive Integrated Employment Center, which is a lot to say. We call it the IC Center. I am the North Idaho Regional Transition Coordinator. And before I tell you a little bit more about IC and myself, I do want to just acknowledge that much of this content was built by Jennifer Comstock, who is the Regional Transition Coordinator for Southeast Idaho. She just couldn't be here today. So I just want to give her props for the work she did to put this presentation together. So the IC Center, we are a new center. We're about a year old. Actually, today is officially my 1-year anniversary here. We are a center at the University of Idaho Center on Human Disabilities and Human Development. And our goal is to improve post-school outcomes for youth. We are working with youth ages 10 to 24, and our overall focus is on competitive integrated employment. We work with 6 pilot schools across the state. We have they're spread all over the state, and we're working to build interagency collaboration and tools and resources for working with youth with disabilities. Personally, I started my professional career as a special education teacher. I taught primarily elementary and middle school, but yeah, worked as a special education teacher. And then after I had kids, kind of stopped working for a while and transitioned into working more with adult services. I worked as a service coordinator for adults with developmental disabilities. And then most recently, prior to coming to IC, I was a vocational rehabilitation counselor for 8 years, working with young adults. So that's a little bit about us. And today, overall, our goals and objectives for what we're hoping to do today is for you to understand a teacher's role in supporting students. We're going to explore some strategies to prepare students for competitive integrated employment, as well as understanding what that concept of CIE is. We're going to learn some concepts about the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then we're also going to learn some skills to promote self-advocacy in youth and young adults. So obviously teachers have a lot of roles and they wear many hats. Today we're going to focus on kind of 3 roles that teachers have when we're preparing students for employment success. So those 3 roles are really to understand what work-based learning experiences are, help students identify skills, their interests, and their goals, and then also to plan and set up opportunities for students to explore work in a multiple different environments. So let's look into a little bit deeper into what all of that means.
Perfect. So work-based learning are opportunities for students to get exposure to professional environments and further develop their workplace skills. Those are going to be things like communication, teamwork, time management, all of those things that employers say are critical for their employees to have. So some of the work-based learning opportunities that we like to get our youth engaged with are going to be things like informational interviews. That's a one-on-one conversation with a professional that helps them explore careers. We also do things like job shadowing, where a student gets to go observe an employee in their daily work, and that's really aimed at understanding a specific role or a specific task within that industry. Some other things that we can do are volunteer work, which allows our students to build skills while also being able to contribute back to their community. And then there's also going to be things like paid or unpaid work-based learning experiences. And that's going to include things like internships, apprenticeships, and even part-time employment. And this is where students really get to have some real-world work experience, things that are able to kind of both develop them, both skill-wise, but also develop a resume, and also be able to build their confidence all within that professional setting. Work-based learning is essential. It's one of the main tools that we use to prepare students for their future employment. And it's going to equip them with the practical skills and knowledge that is going to ultimately enhance their career readiness. So work-based learning is a really valuable tool. It allows our students to apply what they are learning in the classroom to real-world workplace environments. This tool bridges that gap between the learning and application and allows our students to get a deeper understanding of their chosen career field and what is expected from them at a place of business. Students will learn skills that will help them with their future employability. These skills are going to be those things like time management, problem solving, all of which are highly sought after by employers. And students who have those practical work experiences are better prepared for the workforce. And students have that opportunity to refine their skills and better prepare for future employment. So work-based learning gives our students valuable exposure to the different work environments, helping them refine their career goals, align with their interests. This is through firsthand experience. Students get to see how different workplaces function, how different teams collaborate, understand different leadership styles, and see how how the dynamics are different throughout organizations. So one of the things when we are working on setting up work-based learnings is we want to make sure that students avoid doing the same work-based learning multiple times. So we want to help our students broaden their horizons through different opportunities and exposure to different work environments, different companies, and sometimes even different industries. This helps build adaptability and it helps build resilience and helps our students get to learn in different work settings, get to learn different business specific procedures, and get to work with other teams and how to interact with those different teams. Students also will gain the knowledge of how to adapt in those workplace cultures and what are those expectations, understanding what is crucial for their professional growth. Students develop resilience as they encounter new challenges and learn to navigate these work environments. In addition to building problem-solving skills, work-based learning is also going to reinforce good work habits like communication, teamwork, and punctuality. So as educators, you guys play a vital role in helping prepare our students by teaching those foundational skills and by serving as a bridge. It's going to help connect students to a wide range of opportunities and resources. So by helping align these opportunities with our students' unique strengths and their career goals, you guys are able to ensure that students are well equipped both personally and professionally for success. So it's important that we ask what our students are going to gain from the work experience. I mentioned just a minute ago that we're trying not to have those repetitive work experiences. So the first thing we ask are the students gaining additional skills, or are they going to gain skills that will apply to different career paths? The second thing, are students getting the opportunity to explore different roles, even within the same organization? Are we encouraging our students to try new opportunities? And then finally, what progress are they making towards their career goals? Is the work-based learning experience is helping define what that next step is for them? So when we are building out work-based learning opportunities, there's some resources in your community that are already there to assist you. So vocational rehabilitation should have a presence at each of your schools. We have counselors throughout the state that are working directly with the students, and in turn the teachers at the different schools. The Idaho Competitive Integrated Employment Center, or ICE Center, has a ton of resources, and they also have coordinators in each region of the state as well. One of the other organizations is going to be Idaho Parents Unlimited. They have a ton of fantastic resources for students and parents. And then finally, one of the other resources is going to be our Centers for Independent Living. There's 3 centers that cover our entire state. And our CILs provide great training on soft skill development, how to build relationships and other skill sets that ultimately will help our students be more successful with their employment outcomes. So up in northern Idaho is the Disability Action Center. In southwestern Idaho is Link, and then we have Life Incorporated out in eastern Idaho. And when I finish up with this slide, I'm going to go and post links on how to contact each of those organizations. But they are very happy to come out and speak with students and work within the schools to connect with students as well. So the next part of partnerships is working with the businesses in our community. So when we're looking to start building relationships, where I always start is looking at who's already working with the school. Who are the boosters? Who are the athletic sponsors? Who are businesses that have hosted student workers in the past? Those are all really great starting points because they already have a buy-in for the student. They already have a connection to your institution. The other thing that it's really important is to ask the parents of your students. We're often going to see that parents are managers or even owners of businesses in the community who may be more open to hosting students in the workplace because they have one of those students who need the experience. The other thing that I like to do is talk about how these experiences are going to help students from the community, going to help them build and understand jobs from within their community. This is especially important in rural communities because they recognize the impact of helping students and keeping the students local and not them going off and leaving that community. And then I also like to reinforce that these opportunities help build and shape the next generation of the workforce. It's okay to talk about how these opportunities build those crucial skills. My role, I work with employers every day, and I hear all the time about this skills shortage, that people don't know how to show up to work. They don't know how to be punctual. They don't know how to do this. So it's okay to turn that conversation back about how these experiences will help the students be ready when they are going to go to work. And then finally, it's always important that we're evaluating the work setting. So we're constantly looking at what are the students learning? How is the student going to grow from that opportunity? Are the students' goals being met? And then finally, what is the next step for the student when that work-based learning ends? So what is going to be that next thing to continue preparing them to be ready for the future?
Okay. So now that we have some ideas about work-based learning and how to get it set up, how do we get kids connected? And one of the most important pieces of getting kids into work-based learning is helping them identify their skills and their interests. And this is important both for the student and for the teacher or the person that's working to set up the work-based learning. When we're assessing these things, we really want to identify their strengths and their preferences, but also areas for growth, areas where they may need to learn some new skills, and a work-based learning might be able to help them with that. These assessments should also support career exploration and helping students learn a little bit more about jobs of interest. The fact is that we only know about the jobs that we know about. And so if we can expose kids to more and more things that are out there, there are so many jobs that exist that people just don't even know exist. So the more we can help them experience that and learn about that, the better options they have as they're thinking about what kind of jobs they want. Assessments also should help guide informed decisions. Um, we want to make sure that students are being thoughtful and that they are picking realistic career choices. Sometimes, we want to do some kind of job, but we don't, that's just the job we know, or that's what our dad did or our grandpa. And so that's what I always want to be, but we want to make sure that they're understanding what those are, and then also helping them match their skills as we're talking about skills and interests. Do their skills and their interests actually match that career that they're interested in? Um, we also want the assessments to help kind of enhance their employability and their ability to be successful in work-based learning opportunities. So assessments can also assess their skills, um, especially things like soft skills, so that we can match them in good placements. And then assessments can also be used to track growth. So we might do multiple assessments or that repeat the same assessment over time so that we're seeing the progress that they've made. And that can also help inform whether we want a similar type of work experience to further those skills, or they've maybe learn that skill. And so we want to move into something different. The other thing is, as we know, with youth and young adults, their interests change a lot. So you might do an interest assessment one year, and in 6 months or a year later, you do it and it's completely different. So it is important to also just continually be assessing those things. When we talk about assessments, they can look different in many different ways to do them. There are formal assessments that you can use, informal, it can happen through conversation. It's also important to talk to people around that student. So talk to the parents. What do the parents think the kid is interested in or could be good at? Maybe the family knows some things that you don't know about that student, that they have certain skills because they've worked with dad in the garage for years and years, and they know how to do a lot of things with tools or maintenance. And you can also refer to a student's IEP, or even sometimes their 504 plan, to help understand their assessments. Looking at past IEPs, usually also once a student's at least 16, they have interest assessments, so you can see how their interests have changed over time or what has been explored over time. So once you kind of help them identify their skills and interests, then we want to make sure that they are setting career goals that are aligned with those interests and skills. So we can hop to the next slide. Um, I think sometimes this is one of the harder things to do when you're working with students, is to really, we don't want to be a dream killer and say, yeah, nope, that's not going to work for you. You can't do that. But we also want to make sure that students are making choices and experiencing things so they have realistic understanding of careers. So when you're using those assessments and the information that you've gathered about that student, you can also start to work on setting for the student to set some goals. And we'll talk a little bit more about goal setting and how to do that. But you want to make sure that you're working towards work-based learning that aligns with those interests and goals of the student. Um, a good thing to talk to students about, or a concept that you can share with them, is that not every job is for everyone, but there is a job out there for everyone. Um, Sometimes it's really difficult, like I said, to have those conversations with students about realistic employment goals. But a lot of times you can help students really understand why they might, if they really want to be a police officer, what is it about that they want to be? And then let's see if we can find, if for whatever reason being a police officer isn't a realistic employment goal, let's figure out some things that might be similar. One example is I worked with a young man one time who He wanted to be a police officer, but because of some medical conditions, it wasn't realistic for him at that time to get his driver's license, and he probably wouldn't have been able to meet the physical requirements to become a police officer. So we talked we explored a lot of different reasons about why he wanted to do that, and he really just felt like being a police officer was helping the community. So I was actually able to work with him to get a job where he worked in for a business that builds equipment that police officers work. So they gun holsters and different things like that. And I believe he still works there probably almost 10 years later. And we helped him find the connection that he was looking for. And it wasn't the exact job that he wanted, but it was a job that fit his skills and abilities, but also really hit home to the importance of a job for him. So like I said, those could be hard conversations to have. But it also sometimes too, when students are on work-based learning experiences, we might send them on one that we probably know might not work out the best, but sometimes they have to experience it for themselves and make the decision and realize, oh yeah, that job isn't actually what I thought it was going to be about. So you mentioned setting goals and the SMART goal framework. So let's talk a little bit more about goal setting and how that could look like. So we'll hop to the next slide. So as we're working to set goals, there's lots and lots out there about setting goals. So this is just one sort of process that you can use in a classroom to help students set goals. Obviously, we introduce the concept of goals and talk to them about why it's important to set goals, and then also helping them understand short-term and long-term goals is really important. And then you can do some actual goal setting activities. There are many, many templates out there that you can use for helping students set the concept of SMART goals or short-term versus long-term. Lots of things out there that you can use to give them some opportunities to set their own goals. And then the really important piece, I think, is to set an action plan and a timeline. It's really easy. I think we've all been there, that we set a goal that, we're going to stop eating candy or we're going to go to the gym, but we didn't put parameters around it. And so it's really important to help students set those action plans and timelines, and then really also help them track that progress and revisit, reassess, make changes when they need to. And then that's that piece of setting resilience or teaching resilience. Sometimes we set goals and we have to reassess because they're not working out, or we set our short-term goal was really a long-term goal. So let's reassess and make some new short-term goals so we can meet that long-term goal. And then of course we want to celebrate achievements, whether they're big or small. And all of this just really helps those students gain the confidence to be able to move forward and continue with what they're working on. Yeah, so goal setting is really important. And then, of course, as you're looking at those work-based learning experiences, how can we make those match the students' goals that they've set so that they can really start to make progress within those goals? I think the next thing we kind of want to shift focus, we've mentioned a couple times competitive integrated employment. CIE is a big focus of the IC Center. It's also a focus of vocational rehabilitation. So really, what is that and why is it important? We are going to watch a video that really sets the stage and explains what competitive integrated employment is. But the fact is that when you look at employment data for people with disabilities, it's really not great. So our next slide will actually show you some data specific to the state of Idaho. So if you're looking at the chart on the left, that is the unemployment rate, and the orange color on the left was 6%. That is the unemployment rate for Idahoans with disabilities is 6%. For the general population, it's 3%. So you can see that the unemployment rate is double for people with disabilities. A lot of times people will say, well, that's because not as many people with disabilities want to find a job. But the chart on the right shows what's called the labor force participation rate. And if you're not familiar with that, labor force participation rate is really If you're participating in the labor force, it means you're working or you want a job. You're trying to find a job. So the Idahoans with disabilities, 50% of those people with disabilities in the state of Idaho are participating in the workforce. They have a job or they want to have a job. So it's a lot greater percentage than most people think. But yet the unemployment rate is double that. So let's watch this video next so we can learn a little bit about what CIE is.
Have you ever wondered what competitive integrated employment is and how CIE can empower inclusive workplaces? Competitive integrated employment, or CIE, is the gold standard of transition outcomes for students with disabilities. It's defined as real work for real pay and aligns with a student's post-school employment goals. CIE is crucial because it empowers individuals with disabilities to achieve economic independence and enhances their overall quality of life. When a person with a disability is competitively integratedly employed, it means they are being compensated at or above minimum wage, receiving comparable benefits, interacting with colleagues without disabilities, and having the same opportunities for career advancement as their non-disabled co-workers. CIE empowers individuals with disabilities through inclusive jobs, benefiting employers, and fostering an equitable workforce. This approach emphasizes the skills, strengths, and abilities of the individual with a disability rather than focusing on the limitations. Collaboration among educators, agencies, and businesses is essential. It ensures that transition planning is comprehensive and supports are tailored to the individual needs of students. Effective transition to CIE requires solid academic preparation, empowerment of students, involvement of families, connection to transition resources, and meaningful work experiences. Successful employment outcomes hinge on effective support both on and off the job, emphasizing the importance of coordinated efforts among all stakeholders. Competitive integrated employment isn't just a goal, it's a pathway to inclusivity, independence, and economic stability for individuals with disabilities. Join us as we promote competitive integrated employment and build a community where talent knows no boundaries and every individual contributes their unique strengths to a thriving, inclusive economy.
Okay. So CIE and the concept of competitive integrated employment really was solidified in federal law in 2014 with the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIOA, and it explains that CIE is real work for real pay. So a person with a disability is getting paid the same at or above minimum wage, and not just at or above minimum wage, but actually making the same pay as someone else doing the exact same job. They are also receiving comparable benefits to those who are also doing the job. They have the same opportunity for career growth. They're working alongside people with and without disabilities. So it's not just a space where only people with disabilities are working. And really, CIE should be the gold standard and the first choice and first thing to work towards for students with disabilities. And it really empowers individuals to achieve economic independence and enhances their overall quality of life. We all get a lot more from work than just our paycheck. Most of us are probably here for our paycheck, but we all get a lot more from work, and that's the same for individuals with disabilities. So some strategies to promote inclusion in the workplace and in your work-based learning experiences. Really commit to integrated work environments. And we're talking about work environments here, but this also goes into your classrooms as well. Look for integrated work environments, support them. And when you see a business that you can tell is employing people with disabilities, feel free to talk to them. It's a great way to start networking and figuring out more opportunities for work-based learning for your students. You want to build partnerships with employers. Kirby mentioned earlier some ideas for how to get connected with those employers and really getting those partnerships. Once you get a few, then business owners know each other. So they might talk to each other. They know each other. So one business might say, hey, I got this great student worker from this, call VR, call the school. And so building those partnerships is a really, really important part to that network. And then also disability awareness training. And I think this is one of the biggest hesitations for employers because there are a lot of misconceptions about what it means, the risks that might be associated and things like that. So there's a lot of resources, and Kirby's actually going to give us now an overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act and some resources to share with that part. So I'll turn it over to Kirby.
Perfect. Thank you, Angie. So one of the things that Voc Rehab does is we work with employers on helping them understand the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. So we're going to do a really quick overview, so that way you guys as educators know what businesses are, what information the businesses are getting, what knowledge points do they have, so that way we can better prepare our students for having these conversations. So the first thing is the Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law that protects employees with disabilities from discrimination based on their disability. So there's 5 total sections that cover kind of a bunch of different segments of somebody's life. But what we're going to focus on today is Title I, which covers the employment process. And it protects employees in all aspects of that employment process. So that's going to be things like starting from the application process while they're working at the job, and the benefits of employment, which means things like access to company events, promotions, benefits, and all of the other things that are offered to employees. The other thing the ADA does is it requires that employers provide reasonable accommodations throughout the employee's journey with the company. So I mentioned that employees have protections at the application process. That means an applicant can ask for accommodations during the interview, or ask for the application in other formats, or ask for additional time on a required test. There's all sorts of things, even starting at that application point. The other thing that the students and employees can request accommodations for is while working at the job. So that's going to be if they need to come in later because of medical appointments, they need extra breaks, those sort of things. All of those are accommodations that they can ask for while working at the job. And then finally, employers provide accommodations for any other company-sponsored events. So that includes company parties, trainings, and other opportunities that are going to be provided for the employees. So I want to share a really quick video from the Rocky Mountain ADA Center that highlights accommodations in the workplace. Maybe. Yes. There we go.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to share with you some of the ins and outs of requesting an accommodation in the workplace. Did you know that if a qualified applicant or employee has a disability, an employer is required to make a reasonable accommodation for that person? Reasonable accommodations are adjustments provided by an employer so that people with disabilities can enjoy equal employment opportunities. It is important to note that accommodations cannot impose an undue hardship on business operations, and employers are not required to lower quality or production standards to make an accommodation. For an employee, making an accommodation request should be pretty straightforward. There is no need to include or mention the ADA or use the words reasonable accommodation specifically. And a verbal request is just as valid as a written request. However, a formal request is beneficial because it leaves a paper trail. Let's look at an example of a reasonable accommodation. My friend Daniel is having trouble getting to work on time in the morning because of his medical treatments. To accommodate, Daniel's boss has agreed to let him come into work a little later every day. If an employee needs an accommodation for a hidden disability like Daniel, their employer may ask for reasonable documentation. However, there are 2 specific situations in which an employer should not ask for documentation for an accommodation. The first is if the disability and need for reasonable accommodation are obvious. And the second is if information has already been provided supporting the ADA definition of a disability and the need for reasonable accommodation. Another time that reasonable accommodation can be necessary is during the application process. For example, an applicant may request an American Sign Language interpreter for the in-person interview. When an employer considers an accommodation, there Their focus should be on the abilities and limitations of the individual, not on the name of a disability or a physical or mental condition. This is because people who have the same disability may have very different abilities and limitations. On the flip side, people with different kinds of disabilities may have similar limitations. To be qualified for employment, an applicant or employee must be able to perform essential job functions. In other words, the job duties that are fundamental to the position. They are the reason the job exists. For example, if a person is hired to drive a vehicle, the ability to drive is an essential function because this is the reason the position exists. Well, that about wraps it up. Thank you for stopping by. I gotta get back to work.
All right, perfect. And I posted a link to that video in the chat. We use that a lot when we are working with our students. I think it's a really kind of good way to explain accommodations really short, in a short format. So when we are talking, or when a business is talking about accommodations, it needs to, when the employee is making that request, it needs to go through the appropriate channels. So talking to the supervisor, talking to a manager or somebody from the HR team from that company, just telling a coworker about a disability is typically not going to be the starting place for the accommodation process. So it's important that our students know and have the comfortability to go and talk with their supervisor or their manager or whoever that appropriate person is at the company. So when the employee requests an accommodation, that begins what is called the interactive process. And this is a conversation that's between two experts. The student or the employee with the disability, they are the expert on their disability and what is going to help them. And the business, they are the expert on their business operations. And this process is designed to help find what will be beneficial to the employee, while also making sure that the business can support the request. The term reasonable accommodation contains a key word, reasonable. Reasonable is going to vary from each business. What is considered reasonable for a large company like Walmart is going to look different than a small grocery store. So when we have businesses assessing the feasibility of an accommodation, they need to take into factor not just the cost of the accommodation, but the financial resources of the company in total and the effect the accommodation will have on the company. There are times when an accommodation request can be denied, and that's if it imposes an undue hardship for the company. And the ADA defines that as unduly extensive or disruptive or of significant expense. So if the accommodation fundamentally alters the nature of the business, that is considered an undue hardship. So thinking of that, an example would be allowing a service animal into a clean room environment. That would be something that would fundamentally alter the business, and that would be within the business's right to say, hey, we can't accommodate that. But what that means is that they need to go back and have that conversation with the employee that restarts the interactive process to figure out what can be provided to make sure that the employee is able to have the tools that they need to be successful. So some examples, the video talked briefly about these, but some examples that employers commonly provide are going to be things like rearranging a workspace, allowing employees to play music in the earbuds, providing different sorts of assistive technology, and even providing a break for an employee to reset or reduce fatigue. And you notice all of those are going to be things that are fairly simple for employers to incorporate. And that's across the board with most accommodations. When we look at the cost, about 60% of accommodations have no cost for the employer to implement. Because those are going to be things like modifying policies or using equipment that already exists within the company. And of those with a cost, most accommodations are less than $500. So it's going to be very, very rare that we see employers say, hey, this is too expensive for us to implement. So what I like to talk with students about is utilizing their IEP or 504 for accommodations. This is a really good starting point to help our students develop what accommodations may help them during employment. Because we're utilizing those, our students have the opportunity to use those on a daily basis within the classroom. However, it's important from the employer side to remember that some students' accommodations may not be reasonable to request from a business. An example we see on a lot of IEPs and 504s are having extra days to complete an assignment. So would it be reasonable, if you were the business, would it be reasonable to ask that, if we gave you a hard deadline of Thursday to have this done, that we're going, hey, I actually need until next Thursday to get the work done? Is that going to be reasonable for the business? So most likely the answer is no, but there are some other things that that can be done to accomplish the same sort of task. So it could be that we are asking the business for assistance with prioritizing tasks. Could be that we are asking for time management tools or even task separation. So this is where that interactive is crucial, and making sure that our students are able to, we use the term self-advocacy, being able to talk about why they need the accommodation and what is the purpose of the accommodation. So during that interactive process, we're able to come up with solutions that work for everyone. Headphones is another accommodation that we see on a lot of IEPs that may or may not have a place in an employment setting. So it's important to take the environment into consideration. So an office, that may be perfectly acceptable to allow somebody to put headphones in to concentrate. However, a warehouse or a manufacturing environment, that could cause safety issues. So we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about accommodations in the workplace. The other one that we see quite a bit of is chunking assignment. So if you're not familiar with that, it's where we give the student, okay, complete step 1, 2, and 3. And then when you're done with that, come back for 4, 5, and 6, and et cetera, until the assignment's done. That is actually somewhat common in employment settings. It's just something called completely different. So if we go in and say, hey, we need you to chunk this assignment, the employers may not recognize what that means. But if we go in and ask them like, hey, can we utilize a checklist, or can the employee utilize a checklist or something similar, it accomplishes that same sort of thing that we're looking for. So sometimes when we're looking at accommodations, we need to move past the name of the accommodation and get to the heart of what we are really trying to accomplish with that request. So as educators, it's important that we're helping our students understand what resources are available to them and then how to advocate for themselves. So we need to be talking with our students about disability rights, talking about the ADA and how that will apply to their employment. And also help them understand what is discrimination and the protections that they have within the work site. The other thing is our students should understand what is in their transition plan. So this includes what accommodations would be helpful in a workplace setting and how to request an accommodation from an employer. So I mentioned that term earlier, self-advocacy. That is a crucial skill that we need to be helping our students develop. And the reason why is that empowers our students to communicate their needs and how to speak up when things aren't right. But most importantly, it's giving our students that confidence to be able to go and have those conversations and being able to express their needs and be able to get those needs met.
Yeah, so when we're talking about teaching self-advocacy, it really is a skill that needs to be taught. For some people, it just comes naturally, but for a lot of our students with disabilities, we really do need to teach that. So we have a list of sort of 9 kind of general steps to teach self-advocacy in the classroom. And this will hopefully give those students the confidence that Kirby mentioned to ask for what they need. So the first of those things is, and we'll hop to the next slide, Kirby, first to really create a safe and inclusive learning environment. That helps students be comfortable. It helps them understand that they can talk about their challenges along with their strengths. So it's a very important part of the classroom. Then we talked about self-assessments or assessments to help identify needs, and that can really go a long ways for students to be able to say, I'm really good at this, this, and this, but sometimes I need help with this. And then introducing some of those advocacy and employment rights that Kirby mentioned before, helping students understand what that is. Sometimes if you don't know that you have a right to an accommodation, you're not going to request it because you don't even know that that's a right that you have. And then also helping them understand the concept of accommodations. A lot of kids who have, say, if they have an IEP or a 504 plan, they definitely have an understanding of accommodations. They know they might get extra time on a test, or they know that they can go take their test in a separate location, but they might not understand that that even is an accommodation and what that might look like in the workplace. And then also teaching the process of requesting accommodation. We showed that, Kirby showed that video earlier. That kind of video or other things can be shown to students to help them understand that they need to actually request the accommodation. And there are lots of other resources about that as well. I'm actually going to throw a resource out that I don't think Kirby is prepared to share with you, but actually two of them, and I can pop the link in when we're done. But one is Ask Jan. I don't know that we're talking about that later. That's a great way to help students go and learn about accommodations. There's also a document, and I'll find this link, Kirby. It's called the 411 on Disability Disclosure. It's very lengthy, so don't look at it and get nervous, but you can pull parts of out of it, and it really helps students come up with that communication and some sort of scripts and ideas on what they can do when they need to disclose their disability and request an accommodation. And that leads into connecting through role play, let them practice. And then as they're doing that, assess and give feedback and helping them make sure that what they're communicating is clear and concise for what they're needing to the employer. So then I think kind of one of the last big things we're going to share here are just some hands-on tools that you guys can use to help build independence on work-based learning experiences. I think that is often one of an employer's biggest challenges is, oh, if I have the student with a disability come into my workplace, am I going to have to be with them all of the time? So we're going to look at some things that you can use to help build that independence. And the first of those things is checklists. Checklists are a great tool. You do need to teach students how to use a checklist. Some students, they know how, but helping students know that you do the first thing, check it off, go to the second thing, check it off. That can be a skill that students really do need to learn. So Kirby is putting some links to examples of a couple checklists that you can use. And then on the next slide, there's also some visuals, a couple of those that he's sharing with you. So the way that you build a checklist really needs to match what the student's needs are. If the student is not a great reader, don't put a lot of writing on your checklist. You can use pictures in a checklist to help. They can be basic words or more. You can see here on the list 2 examples, and obviously those would be used for 2 very different students. And checklists also, you can have checklists that are really specific to a task. So if the student just always has a hard time getting started, but once they get started, they're good to go, then their checklist might just have those getting started activities, or maybe they don't know how to close at the end of their shift. So checklists can really be tailored to what a student wants. And same with schedules and other data forms that students might want to use. Those can be used for students to track themselves, for you to track, for an employer to track, lots of different ways to use those tools. So now what? We've talked a lot. I think sometimes the concepts can be pretty overwhelming to think about starting this if you're not used to doing this yet. But just sort of a few last minute tools to think about as you are working to develop these work-based learning experiences. One of the first is to really recruit and think about your business partners and the employers that you're working with. Do some research before you go out and meet with an employer. Learn their language, understand how their business works. You can also go into the business with examples of how you think a student might benefit from that work experience and vice versa, how a business can. You can also go into a business just starting the conversation from the perspective of learning about the business, and don't go in with an agenda. Just ask to learn about their business, and then you can formulate there whether or not you might have students that would be a good fit for their businesses. Also kind of develop a pitch and your own script about why you want to work with them, how it could benefit the business. talk about your students, talk about the strengths of the students. And like I said earlier, give them really great examples of what a student might be able to do, how they can work, and how it will be a mutually benefit type of situation. And also just really talking about them to them that they are building the next workforce. When you do work-based learning experiences, they are giving those students tools that they will use for a long time. And oftentimes it could lead to employment at that business or long term. So we're really building that talent pipeline and working towards building the future of our employment. So in summary, oh, I have the first part. Sorry. So work-based learning, just kind of to recap everything, it's something that should be diverse for students based on their on their interests, skills, and their goals. And then it also depends on your partnerships and how you build those partnerships with employers. Competitive integrated employment, or CIE, is that gold standard of what we should be working for all students. So they are working in the community, being paid what others doing the same job, and they have the same opportunities for advancement. It is what we want to put in our forefront of thought when we're working with students and youth with disabilities. Oh, I think you might be muted, Kirby. We lost your sound.
Hello.
There we go.
There we go. There we go. Now my thing's lighting up. Okay. So the other part that we talked about was the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it's reminding our students that the purpose of accommodations is to help them be successful in the workplace. And it's okay to ask for those. But it's important that we are making sure we are talking to the right people, because again, that's going to be our supervisors, our managers, the HR team for the company. Just disclosing your disability to a coworker is not necessarily going to help get the accommodation that our student needs. And then it's important that we're practicing that self-advocacy, that we don't get perfect the first time we go out. So as we're having those conversations, we're building up those confidence, we're building up those skills. So doing those things like role playing, doing those things within the classroom to help our students get comfortable with asking for the help that they need. So, and then I am going to throw a link for the accommodation network on here. I thought we had a slide for it. I guess that was a different presentation I was thinking of. But Angie mentioned the Job Accommodation Network, which is askjan.org. And I'm going to throw that here in the chat. And that is a phenomenal resource. We recommend that businesses start there with the accommodation process, but it's a really good spot for students as well, because it has a ton of great information and even things where, like, I know I have this disability and I struggle with this and I have no clue what would help me. There's a lot of really cool tools and a lot of really cool suggestions that the Job Accommodation Network has. And that's all free for anyone to utilize. So it's a really, really good resource. So before we wrap up, we're going to put that QR code up one more time. If you joined us late and did not sign in, we would ask for you to do that now. So if you could please scan that QR code or use the tiny URL link, that would be awesome. There we go. And I'll leave that up here for just a second. And then Angie, do you want to start talking about the community of practice, and I'll transition to that slide here in a couple seconds.
Yeah, perfect. So the IC Center has started a community of practice that is targeted at education professionals throughout the state. That community of practice, this particular one that we're talking about, is a monthly community of practice meeting that's held virtually with a focus on competitive integrated employment. So understanding what it is, best practices for how to get students set up for success. And then also just lots of opportunities to share with other education professionals throughout the state, sharing resources and sometimes even sharing challenges and brainstorming how we get through those challenges. So it's a great opportunity. It meets on the third Wednesday of every month. So I think next Wednesday will be the next meeting, and that QR code there can take you to the registration link for that community of practice.
Right. And again, we'll leave that up here for just another couple seconds for you to scan that. And I don't know, Angie, can you throw that tiny URL in the chat? Perfect.
Pulling it up right now.
All right, and then the last thing that we were going to do is just share some of the resources that are available for you guys. So they're listed on the screen. I just put them in the chat. Our ADA centers, we have both one locally for the Northwest ADA and then also nationally. They have a lot of great information on the ADA, as well as how do we kind of talk with students about their rights and responsibilities. There's information for the IC Center as well as vocational rehabilitation. And then that website that we talked about, the Job Accommodation Network, those are all there for you guys to utilize.